Ready. Thank you for bearing with us. Okay, so the first question, if you guys both want to tell us your personal experience with Makerspaces, and I'm sure as part of that, we'll get some history of Makerspaces as well, and kind of what where they started from, and kind of how they developed in the past. So, do you want to go first, Jeff?
Yeah, sure. So, so I've been working in libraries for about 17 years now, and maybe about, I don't know, early 2012 or 13, I got told, hey, we're gonna go visit a makerspace. And I was like, well, what's that? It's like, well, they got 3D printers and things like that. And I thought, well, that sounds like something that I am not used to in a library setting. And so I actually got to visit THINKSpot for the first time down in Mesa at Red Mountain. And I thought, this has got to be the coolest thing ever. Before they were 3D printing, and at the time they were 3D printing just like nonstop because that was like a huge craze. But the idea that we, instead of just having materials, but actually having like equipping people with digital making equipment, including, I think there was a book binder, and back then there was even like a business space for collaboration. And I was like, why didn't this exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Then we moved to about 4 years ago when I had the opportunity to become the THINKSpot Librarian at Mesa. And I'm like, I get to run a makerspace and run 12 different pieces of equipment, not just a 3D printer, but all kinds of cool stuff, and be able to sort of help influence and make our doors open to as many people as we possibly can. And so that blew my mind. So one of the really cool things that I've learned over the past couple of years is that we are constantly changing. When I learned about makerspaces, it was 3D printers, right? It was maybe a sewing machine, but now we've become so much more, and we've been adapting so much more. And so yeah.
Hi, I'm David, and I've been actually with this library system for 20 years. Back in 2014, I became a library assistant, and that's when I started doing programming initially. And with that programming, I had a strong suit in technologies, and so they put me into more of like doing our gaming and Minecraft and anything that was tech-based. With that, we had actually just got a grant, the STEM Venture grant, I can't remember. Anyways, that one we decided we were going to do a makerspace, but our makerspace at the time was going to be a little bit different. We went the route of more of a mobile makerspace. So with that mobile makerspace, kind of like these little green tubs that you see over here in the corner, they were just portable kits that we could take out to schools or events or anything like that, that had supplies in there. I wouldn't really call them true makerspace stuff because the stuff that they were using were more like fun gadgets than they were DIY stuff. Over time, we got 3D printers and stuff like that, but I was very frustrated because we're using it inside the library as far as programming inside the library, making stuff for the library. Nothing was really public getting hands-on truly. And every time they ask, well, how do I get access to this? And you're like, well, that's the fun story. There's other library systems that you can go to. So it's a very frustrating world. So we worked really hard to get to a new makerspace point, where about 2 years ago, we built this facility. It's 3 main rooms. There's the programming room here, where we'll actually host our meeting events. We have our Makery studio, which is going to be our audio video equipment, which is on this table over here as a sample. And then behind this room, we have the Makery lab, which is more of the DIY lab, that has like the 3D printer, the glow forge, our cricut cutting machines, sewing machines, and all of that stuff. Both those rooms have access to the public now with their library cards. They just go through some training and stuff like that. But this is now something that the public has access to. Over time, just over the road right here, we have the former Tech Shop Chandler, and then it became Hub 249, and then ASU Innovation Center, and I think now it's the Chandler Innovation Center, which is a giant makerspace that's membership based. We want to work with them. We never want to compete with them. They're right there. We have Gangplank that was down the road. you know, there's all these different like places that are right here. And so we never want to step on anybody's toes. So it's about collaboration. So now, as things are growing, we're seeing that other facilities and other departments are also getting equipment, and we're trying to like share what these do and how you can expand on this. So that means that we're getting things like, hey, you should get a Cricut because you can use this for your stuff that you're doing at, you know, the Parks and Rec Center, or hey, you should get a 3D printer over at the Chandler Nature Center because you're doing this kind of stuff. So we're working with them to teach them how to use their own equipment, doing collaborations, doing some stuff that they can do. But that's kind of where our Makerspace has evolved, is that we're still trying to provide to the public, but we're also providing in the.
Awesome, cool. And kind of on that point, what specifically is unique about your Makerspace here, and then we'll go to ThinkSpot. It can be equipment, it can be functionality, it can be scheduling. I mean, there's a lot of variables, but what do you think is kind of unique or special about the Makery?
So for us, I've been trying to build our studio so that it's a little bit more mobile. We're getting some portable sound booths so that we can take it off-site. So that way, when we go out to events, we can actually like record and do interviews and stuff like that a little bit cleaner out on the site. We like take pride in our glow forge because I think it's the signature thing that the public enjoys. That's the number one thing that people are always like intimidated by, but they're always excited to see. But that's the two things that I think that we're most known for. The new thing that we're trying to work toward is more of our VR stuff. We want to do more on-hand training, so you can do VR training to learn how to use these equipment or how to do workforce and get prepared for certain jobs. So we're trying to push that initiative, so hopefully that will be our new.
So one of the things that's really special about ThinkSpot is that we're trying to break the barriers to be able to get people into our Makerspaces. We started out in Red Mountain. We have one in Maine. We're about to open another ThinkSpot at our Dobson branch, and then when we do open our fourth branch down by Ellsworth, or Airmark area, we'll be having another ThinkSpot there. 4 years ago, we sort of got rid of the kind of thing where you had to learn from us physically how to use equipment. Instead, we went completely online. So you had the ability to simply do the training, reserve the equipment like a study room, and hop right on. And making it as easy as possible to be able to use that equipment was one of the things that, for me, was super, super important, because if you have an idea, I want you to be able to run with it. One of the things that I really love about working in ThinkSpot is being able to utilize the equipment to think of new ways to use those pieces of equipment and those opportunities, and being able to express those opportunities to someone who is trying to create a new business, somebody who would love to learn how to use a new piece of equipment. So starting at a younger age, ages 12 and up are able to use the equipment that we have. But we're moving from being able to think of 3D printers as simply something where it prints hard plastic. And now we literally have things we can print with soft materials that squish. And what the big thing that we're always doing is we're innovating. What is the next big piece of equipment before it becomes the next big piece of equipment? And trying to figure that out before. We had the glow forge for years. We were just waiting for an air filter. That's so it was safe, right? But now the glow forge is a big deal. So what is that thing that will be a big deal that suddenly people were able to start here to be able, we could empower them to be able to make in whatever that new awesome facet is. So
you asked the question. So what is the what are the things that you see that might be hot and new coming up over the next 5 years that might be that next glow forge?
So for me, it goes in many different directions, okay? One of the things that I've noticed is the moving from, so 3D printing is great for prototyping, right? You're creating your new idea and you're creating something that's starting from scratch. And you're like, I wanted to see what it would look like in real life. Well, now we have, and that works too for things like vinyl cutters and such. But now we've moved to having CNC routers, something that can literally create something, different levels on wood and materials like that. We have laser cutters that can cut, and then you can start making more three-dimensional objects. Well, now can we go beyond acrylics and woods? Can we go to metals? Can we make metal safe? Will there be new equipment that will be safe, that we can have in an environment where kids might be able to get in and touch it, right? So there are starting to be things like that. There's a machine called the Wazer, which is a desktop late water jet cutter. It can cut titanium, and if you lift the lid, what happens? It stops, right? That basically is game changing for a library where you don't want someone to accidentally hurt themselves, right? So things like that will happen. I assumed something like that. And so I gave myself pictures to remember the awesome of future, right? So if that is a possibility for flat, right? So if cutting metals flat, well, then what about cutting metals in 3D, right? So that would be more like a CNC metal router. Now that is not commercially like smaller yet, right? But that's the future. Something in the future will come out where that will be able to sit on a desktop, because somebody's going to be like, I want to manufacture something, and that manufacturer where you used to have to get that from somebody else can happen at the library. Now, there's also things that are, and I love saying the word desktop, by the way. When you say desktop, that means it's safe probably maybe to be at the library. So let's say that, okay, some people love to say, I want to prototype with a 3D printer, right? Because the 3D printer can make my dreams come true. But you're making a machine, right? You're making a machine that you want to be able to do things. Well, that machine, it might not matter what the outer box of that machine is. You just need to hold it in something. Well, therefore, you could just get like oh my gosh, I've already forgotten the word for it, but the plastic, what is it called? A vacuum sealer, basically a desktop vacuum sealer that basically can be any shape. I put this cup down, I push a piece of plastic over it. Magically now I have a dome. Well, I have Alexa, you know? I literally have now a capsule that I can make my new robot in. And not to mention the fact that you can also make holiday masks with it. So there are all kinds of really creative stuff that people can use for different reasons for this sort of stuff. And then last but not least, I really think the future for, like David just said, VR and AR and the mixed sort of the two, that's definitely a possibility for the future for both teaching and creating. And we want to be able to put that in people's hands.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. We're kind of like crossing over with that, the mixed reality. It's like, if you haven't seen the owl and what that does, it's like a simple thing, but super fun camera. The mixed reality concept takes that same concept and starts adding into the fact that, you know, they have technologies now like I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's like the magic mirror, I think it's called, where you can actually see a window of the people on the other side as if they're in the room with you. So that way you can, it's kind of like, if you ever seen Demolition Man and they have like their chairs and have the people's faces on there that are all turning and looking at people. It's like that. But the point is that right now you can look at a monitor, you can see the people that are on there, you know, but they can see this whole room. Well, the concept would be that you'd actually add both sides of that. So then you can see all the individual people as if they were here, not so much holograms, just visual, you know, illusions. But that's kind of like that mixed reality that can add classrooms and attendance and for programs and all sorts of things. So then get more hands-on and learn things. Another tech that I'm looking at that much like the 3D printer, when they first started coming out, it was like, oh, it's such a cool technology, but I don't want to spend $10,000, $20,000. But as it becomes more common and more used, that price comes down because more competitors, the price comes down. More advancing technologies make the price comes down. And now it's more affordable. You're in that $2,000 range, maybe $1,000 range. Residential, you're at $300. I mean, it's easy to do that kind of stuff. Well, the next technology I've been looking at is one called binder jetting, if you're not familiar. It's kind of a 2D, 3D printing. It's powder-based printing that what it does is it lays down a layer of powder and then uses resin ink to draw, just like it would a printer, an image, but it's more of a CAT scan. So think like a 3D printer concept. Then it puts down another layer of powder, ink, resin, powder, ink, resin, and it just keeps going until it fills all the way up. This is all enclosed into a box, which then has a vacuum tube and arms that you can go in, suck out all that powder that wasn't used. It's reusable. And then you're left with your final product that is a solid resin-based product that is extremely tough. I had a test of it, which was super crazy. But I also did a prototype at home for myself, where I actually I met with this company that I'm going to show everybody because it's amazing. For our wedding photos, I wanted to get something special for my wife for her first anniversary. And I took our photos and I said, I want to get a 3D statue of us. And I took that photo and turned it into a 3D model, full color, to the point where you can even see the like tan of my watch. So like, it's super cool. It's awesome. I really should have brought it in.
Oh, that's amazing.
But it's just like, and like the test that they had, they said, oh, it's tough, don't worry. Just go ahead and throw it on the ground. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna throw it on the ground. I did drop it, and it did great. But I mean, it is high def 3D modeling that like, this takes it to a whole new level where you don't have to do filament or anything of that sort. It's all just one product. And you can just do some intense stuff with it.
And resin version of the metal printers.
Essentially. But it's super cool and it's great because you have no loss. So like with a resin printer where you're actually doing it, you have a lot of like loss of product because you can't reuse some of that liquid that's in it. But this doesn't have a loss of product, so you're pretty much on solid 100% use.
Does that make resin printing safer? Does it make resin printing safe?
It's all
It's
enclosed.
all enclosed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It vacuums itself up, so it's reusable, like, and it doesn't, and it puts it down itself. It's all closed in.
Cool, man.
But that price is still like, it's just over the horizon. So it's not there yet, but it's coming down. I can see it. And so once it gets to that point, I think that's when it's gonna be time to jump on it ahead of the game. So it might be a pricier thing, but it's something that I think would be a great addition for the public.
That's cool. I need to get better anniversary presents. So.
Try really hard.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. So it came up a couple times about VR, AR, mixed reality. What like for specific use cases within a makerspace, what do you see, like whether it's design or education? I like the idea of doing the actual training using the VR is kind of a fun concept. Because sometimes it can feel like it's a little demo based, you know, it's like, how do we get actual, you know, usage out of the technology rather than just exposure showing them what it is.
I love the idea of having a VR experience on how to use the equipment. I think one of the hardest things for some people to do, a lot of people, online training, hop on, great, right? But we only have so much staff who can only know how to use so much equipment, right? And so the idea that you can learn in VR how to use the equipment we have in ThinkSpot would be fabulous. But I was thinking, how wonderful would it be if we could do it in AR? So I don't understand how to put the drill bit on the CNC router. And instead of having to watch my hands block it slightly by showing somebody in physical format, having someone show them in AR where they can look at it any way they want and see how it's done. Like, okay, now we've been able to show you how to do something in a unique way that, besides the fact that it just benefits the patrons for feeling more comfortable about it, but isn't that like the coolest thing ever? Like, can you imagine, like, there's something showing you how to do a thing, but they're not in your way. Oh, that's how I load the 3D printer. Oh, I gotta make sure that I pull out that print cord before and swap it with a different one, so we don't have a mistake in a $200 replacement fee, right? That would be fabulous. So yeah.
With us, we're looking to do more with like integrations with our 360 camera that's floating up there. It's not on, so don't worry, you're not being recorded. But that's one of those things that has direct recording and live streaming into a VR headset. But it's also nice because you can actually record and then upload it into the Quest. So that way you can have it, you know, offsite. That's one of those things that we can use it for demoing what the lab and the equipment and everything that's in there, rather than just showing like a web page. Here's the list of equipment. We can take it to outreach events and stuff like that and say, hey, you want to see what our lab is about? Take a look at the laser cutter and see how it's done. And then they can actually see from the beginning of, you know, powering everything on, opening it up, putting in the equipment, and cutting everything out. They can see that process in full 360, but that way they can actually look around and see the different stages. They can actually look, you know, at the machine itself. They can see what the screen is. So if somebody's going back and forward, they're not just stuck staring at one thing and being like, what's going on, like what's happening, and they're doing stuff behind them. This way they're fully interactive with the process of doing these different things. Same thing can be said for our studio. So setting up the microphone, which, you know, it looks very simple, but it's actually a whole bunch of pieces. So just having those things of demonstration of how to do those things, similar to the AR, where you have that aspect of, you know, seeing it live while you're there. Another part of it is being able to, you know, watch it and be able to see all the pieces around you, not just into your limited scope. AR has that great functionality as well. The other part that we're looking at is that we're also looking to expand our into a full classroom set, so that way we can have full classroom inclusive access, so that way they can all do something at the same time. And then we've actually been looking at some of the software. I come from a different technical school that they actually generate virtual reality environments, and they're actually looking at trying to put together a classroom makerspace that's virtual, so that way they can all do it together. Because there's some equipment that will require 2 people to do it at the same time, or 3 people, that we're actually going to convert into possibly a escape room puzzle kind of thing. That will kind of like teach them how to use the equipment, but in a fun way. So that way our younger kids can learn how to do it without being all the technical stuff.
Can I jump in right there? Because I think there's something really special about like the whole VR environment. So I have a couple students that love to get to ThinkSpot to create in VR because, you know, it's a safe space and they know nobody's going to technically jump and bother them. But the idea of the adaptability of what you can create, because the files are so similar, that you can create something in VR that's a 3-dimensional object that then can be 3D printed, right? To be able to create something that in a vector form, if you don't know vector files like SVGs and things, no matter how big or small, it's the same. But to be able to convert and create these things that can be used on other machines, all within your own VR environment, is such a cool concept. And we have all of these different machines that all use the same kinds of things. So I can show you the same like dog creation in both a puffed out 3D form, on a flat thing, on a t-shirt, laser cut engraved on a box. And so that's all possible with sort of like this digital realm that we're in. So
Yeah, that's cool. And you mentioned 3D printers, and they came up earlier as like kind of the first wave of equipment in ThinkSpot or in Makerspaces. That first wave of technology, 3D printers, sewing machines, that kind of thing, are they still prevalent, or do they still get used a lot? Is that still kind of the bread and butter, or how do you see the sort of trend line for that first wave of tech?
So the price point has definitely gone down for 3D printers and a whole lot of the things that we have in our makerspaces. But I like to still think that, you know, there are still people who can't afford even a couple $100s, or even a lightweight sewing machine that costs a little bit, you know, $150. And I mean, we're still helpful for that. But I mean, what the reason why the makerspace exists is to empower people to be able to learn how to use equipment, to be able to maybe start some people's journeys in that direction to basically finding their career choice or finding their creative outlet. And so even if a 3D printer is possible to be in a home, somebody might never know that they wanted it. Some people who come to ThinkSpot, I mean, it's the worst thing and it's the greatest thing. Some people come to ThinkSpot, they create a prototype, or some people come to this ThinkSpot and they start using the vinyl cutter to start their business. And they do so well, they never come back because they buy their own machine, right? We know that's a success. And then we also, you know, it's a sad goodbye, but you know that you made a difference in someone's life. And then rolls in, you know, round 2 and round 3. But we also need to keep knowing that there are cooler and newer things too coming in, right? So that's sort of that, you know, intersection, if you will.
It's kind of hard to tell sometimes because you never know when you're going to need something, and you don't want to hoard your technologies. But for example, we have our sewing machine that's in the Makery lab at all times, so that way it can be reserved and utilized. And in the last year and change, I have had 0 use, like not a single reservation for it. However, every second Saturday, we do a sewing lab in here, where we actually have all 8 machines in here. And we'll actually have somebody on hand that can actually assist. Again, they're not going to teach. The closest that they'll teach is that they have a little like their favorite thing in the world to do is scrunchies. And it's a very simple thing to teach, a very simple thing to do. But I mean, like candy, people love doing that. They learn the basics of sewing machine. And I think that's more what they strive for when it comes to the sewing machine, for example, is that they want to learn the basic of it. And then they build that confidence and then they can go in and do more, whether it's on their own machine at home, which that's what I hear more often is that I have one, I don't know what to do with it, you know, and then, you know, they come in for the basics and stuff like that. But the sewing lab is definitely a lot more success, not just for the scrunchy part, but also for the overall use of the machines. But in our lab, it has had 0 use. Our Cricut cutting machine, that one I would say is starting to become more of that older generation, I would say. It's still a newer one, but that has about weekly usage out of it for public side. For staff side, it was becoming to the point where it was daily, almost twice a day, by multiple staff, to the point where we just recently bought a second machine for them to use for themselves. So that way they stopped taking the lab off of the public side. But that's one of those things that, you know, that's good. That shows that it was a used product and that's what we wanted. So, and then we have like our 3D printer, which that one probably has the most usage out of everything. And that one's almost like every other day usage. And again, like half staff, half, you know, public and stuff like that. But that's definitely still a popular thing because I think people are a lot more confident about it. They don't necessarily want to go buy their own, so they don't have to maintain or anything like that. They just want to basically come and get access to it. And then the Glowforge, that's, I think, would have the same effect as the 3D printer. I think that just has that intimidation factor. And once the people get past that, you know, once I do a demonstration of it, I'll have like 6, 7 reservations for the lab right after I do a demonstration of it. So if I did more demonstrations, I could pick up speed in the lab itself. Right. You know, so some of those older technologies, I don't think that, you know, it's like a tool. You know, we have digital calipers, you know. Do you need them? No, but they're handy. You know, you never know when you're going to need to have that. You never know when somebody's going to request something like that. So it's nice to have, but you just never know when like it's something that like maybe it's time to retire something out or like that.
That brings up an interesting point, because we don't always think about how the makerspace can be a support for staff as well, right? And how many times have you made something real fast in ThinkSpot for a program or for an outreach or something that is the custom one of a kind thing? So that's interesting to think of how a makerspace can be an open reservation space. It can support programming, it can support staff. One of the things that's interesting is that you're kind of talking about is like a more mobile makerspace or offsite access. What's like I guess a quick rundown on sort of a bare minimum of what could be successful for sort of offsite makerspace?
So offsite makerspace, so like I said, we did a mobile makerspace before, but it wasn't a true makerspace. That was more of a STEM attempt than anything. What we're actually looking at is our friends is coming up with their 40th anniversary, and they're putting together a potential of a new bookmobile. With this bookmobile, we want to add some stuff that's going to add in a possible like mobile makery aspect to it. So with that, we're going to look at possibly getting a board van, getting it electric, kitted out, and then we're going to get a, whatchamacallit, we're getting solar panel put on. We're getting it so that there'll be a generator installed, because we want to add in a lift system in the back, so that way we can take book carts out there, the good old classic bookmobile stuff. But with that, we also want to add in the 3D printer, have that out on the field, lights, hotspots, stuff like that, stuff that gives access to the public. One other one that we looked at is that there's Local Motors and Rivian, and we actually talked with them, and Local Motors has their van called the bus called the Ollie. And Ollie is a, similar to Waymo, it's a self-driving vehicle. And we looked at that and partnering with them before there was a whole snafu. But the idea was that we were actually looking at potentially going into a mobile makerspace to the point where it could be sent offsite. So rather than we would be the one going, it would actually be like, oh, you want the makerspace at that school? Okay, well, it's on its way, And again, it would be the training and all that stuff similar to what we have. It wouldn't have the glow porch, but it would have like the 3D printer, the sewing machine, the Cricut, stuff like that, just the same as our makerspace. But inside of this, that would have access so that it would arrive at the wherever the event is, and they would have access to it. They could get in, they could do the equipment, use it, do whatever they need, and then when they're done, they close it up, it sends itself home. We talked with the city itself is looking at some other stuff that are more of like that. There was like rover kind of stuff in there. And so we looked at what would it mean to have like self-driving vehicles and rovers on the streets, and how would we control this network of all these things, because like we're just the library, we're not really like that advanced. So I don't know where that stands right now, because that's now quite above my pay grade. But that's one thing that we've kind of talked about as like the new generation of a makerspace, like making it so that it's not here. For me, the key aspect of the library is access. So like, how do you get access to these different things? Well, sometimes you're not able to access the facility. So having that access to provide that to wherever it needs to go, that I think is that next part of it all.
I think getting out there is very, very important. I think being able to do programming and do outreach to be able to show what the library has, but even be able to do programming and show the benefits to kind of engage with the ideas of what we can have. I mean, I would love the ability to make it so we have a mobile space that someone can literally come in and use. But also just the idea that if you can come up with programming by being able to have machines that literally can go to a place, and you have the programming ideas that can use a machine fast enough to do a program that's 30 minutes long, 45 minutes long, that can make things quick enough. So laser engraving takes a while, but laser cutting is quick. And if they have something that has already been pre-engraved with your logo on it, but they get to watch something get cut with lasers. I mean, it's like cooler than Austin Powers lasers, right? I mean, that's magical, right? Watching acrylic get cut with a laser cutter is like magic, because it's like watching without the cracks, right? But having that kind of thing, or if it's in a bookmobile, when someone is looking around for materials and they see a 10-minute demo, a 15-minute demo that's going on, I mean, that's eye-catching. Wait, libraries do that? How often do we still hear that, right? Your library, I didn't even know this existed. That is what we're trying to kind of like delve in. People know libraries have computers now, right? Libraries have so much more, and we just have to keep pushing the bar until it's screaming it at the top of every mountain, right? That we have so much more, right? So and then the only question is where do we go? Where do we need to do to make that happen, right? So
Cool. So I'm gonna combine a few questions here just to make sure we have plenty of time at the end for questions and everybody can hang out since we're here in person. So it's come up a couple times about programming. You mentioned you'll do a demonstration and all of a sudden you'll have a bunch of reservations, right? I know at ThinkSpot, it's packed out when there's programs. If it's just reservations, it's well, basically busy as it is during programs. So I guess the question is, what do you all feel is the kind of ideal staff time as it relates to safety, training, scheduling, as well as maybe tied into that of how much would you estimate the Makerspace usage is driven by programming itself? Like how important is that to the success of it?
So with our programming, like, it's kind of one of those things, like I said, where it's almost like correlated, where I have a steady reoccurring, amount of people that come in and use the facilities and stuff like that. But it's definitely one of those things that once you get a program, you get new people that are interested and experienced. And then you go out, you do outreach, and same thing, you get another burst that comes in. So I try to do it on a regular basis where I try to pace things out. So that way I can cycle through different pieces of equipment. So I can keep different interests coming live. The programming side of things isn't so bad as far as like the staff time and stuff like that. I think the hardest thing that we see for staff time is going to be the glow boards, just because that requires an individual to be there for the fire blanket, the fire extinguisher, for fire safety in general. So while we have the glow forge going, we have a staff member that's there. Previously, we had it so that appointments were for 4 hours. And a lot of times what we were finding was that everybody would book the 4 hours and we'd have to juggle our schedule as best as we could to like figure that out. And when you're short staffed or not everybody has the training done yet, or all these different variables, holidays, vacations, sick time, like all these things, it was very excruciating to get 4 hours out of that, only to find out that they were in there and they're like, either they didn't have the right material or they didn't have anything, they didn't have their stuff, like nothing was done, so that you're in there for maybe 15-20 minutes, explain, well, here's what you should have, this is what you should do, you want to do this, go ahead and rebook, make another appointment, blah, blah, and that. And so they leave after 30 minutes, an hour, and you just messed everybody's schedule up for that 4 hours. The second part of that is that they come back and they book the 4 hours, you figure that out. But then what happens is that same thing, they put it in there and they do their thing, they had everything right this time. But again, it was only like an hour, maybe 2 hours max. And so you're like, why are we doing these 4 hour shifts when nobody's really maximizing that time? So that's why we've reduced it down to 2 hours to kind of help with that. Since our schedule in general revolves more around a 2 hour shift change rather than a 4 hour shift change, it makes it a little bit easier to get people in there for staff time. So that's helped out a lot on our side for that.
So in ThinkSpot, we've had a lot of different ways that we've run the kind of staffing, But at this point in time, there is now a person that's in there and it just changes hourly. And the way that I train staff the best I can, there's a lot of pieces of equipment. Every staff member has their own piece of equipment or more than one that they like to use. But we all kind of know who knows what throughout the building, and we just sort of do our best. Everyone knows that if something goes wrong, it's okay to try to help out. But the biggest thing that the way we work with staff is we go with the idea that you think of working in ThinkSpot as you are doing desk reference for the equipment. And because there's online training, if somebody is at the desk and they don't know how to use that piece of equipment, we have them grab a laptop, open that piece of equipment, or not, open that video and try to help them. Not do it for them, but try to find what they're having an issue with. Now, you know, of course, if I'm around or something like that, we'll do our best to be able to help out whatever issue's going on. And some days I'm going to come in and find out the 3D printer's clogged, but that's okay. I mean, these things happen and we just do our best, but that's sort of the way that we've been rolling with it. And that kind of, and unfortunately, you can reserve the equipment from literally from when we're open to when we're closed, or you can reserve it for 15 minutes. I'd say the only mistakes anybody ever makes on their first 3D print is thinking that it's only going to take 15 minutes. I had somebody literally like half an hour before close reserve it for 30 minutes, and you just like, that was the wait for it to get going and to get your machine ready to go, right? But for programming wise, I mean, it's totally true. So I do every month I teach a different piece of equipment. Generally, I try to do something unique to that piece of equipment to kind of influence the idea that it's not just for printing, you know, solid blocks. Or have you ever thought of a 3D printer at making bookmarks, right? So you do some 3D printing bookmark ideas, stuff like that. But each of those programs I do, generally about 10 to 12 adults or teens that I do it with, I generally will get at least 1 or 2 people that start using the equipment. And so what's nice is that every month I do a different piece of equipment. We're able to kind of see those pieces of equipment take a little hike. And if somebody really becomes really infatuated with one of the pieces of equipment, they start using it a lot. And it's great to see those new friends until, right, they start loving it so much that they want more time than we have, right? But staff time wise, I think the biggest thing is just making staff feel comfortable being around things like the X-Carve, which is a CNC router, or the Glowforge, where there's fire, you know? And I mean, we've gone through the whole process of fire, by the way. And I mean, what's nice about the Glowforge is, I mean, as long as that top is down, you know, it's staying in there, okay? But it's always good to have the blanket, and you do need to talk to your fire marshal about what the rules are. But yeah, but it's also nice to make sure that staff know that you can totally do a project in 5 minutes on the Glowforge, so.
All right, awesome. So kind of moving on to maybe some planning or budgetary thoughts around Makerspaces. So what is something that that you think library makerspace should be wary of purchasing? Either it's too expensive, it's risky, it's dangerous, it won't get used, any of those reasons.
So I have 2 things, and I'll just do them quick. Is one thing, you never want to have a machine that you can openly like touch what's going on. So 3 laser cutters used to come out, and they all just had those nice tops that are super heavy, stuff like that. But now, I don't know if there's any of you, especially your all tech crew here, they are making them that now you can literally like openly just put against a wall and engrave, right? You can literally watch the laser go around and stick your finger under if you wanted to. So suggestion, if you ever get a piece of equipment, always make sure that it has a cap So that the idle hands can't accidentally be interested, and it stops when you lift that lid. And then resin printers, in general, like what Dave's talking about is I love that concept. But the reason why I think resin printers are kind of dangerous is the idea that the public is, you know how like when you let some people borrow things and they don't treat them as good as they would their own things? Well, they're playing with resin, which is technically like a toxic material that if they don't properly wear gloves and that stuff gets on their skin, they've officially poisoned their body. Having that around kids is super dangerous, and resin printing is cool. But the idea is I feel like if you made that and put that out in the public setting, it's just a little bit dangerous. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I definitely agree. The big thing that I've noticed is that I see it more when I talk to the public, but I also get it when I talk to like staff and other people in the library world. But what I get is we're talking about 3D printers, for example, just a really basic thing, and talking about, well, how much did yours cost? No, I'll tell you, it was about 2,000, and you know, we did this, which was like another 1,000, and this. I'm like, oh man, that's so expensive. I'm like, yeah, but 3D printers have evolved, you know, and now we get Ender Reality 3 Pro, you know, you can get that for, you know, $300 and all this stuff. But the difference, and this is where, you know, people kind of start relating to it, is that you're buying Apple versus Android. You know, one is that user friendly, easy to use, which is our Ultimaker, it's the Makerbot, it's all that kind of stuff, big brand names. They have all the bells and whistles, but you're paying for it. It's also user friendly, you just plug and play. However, when you get to the Ender Reality, you can do so much stuff with that. I mean, it's ridiculous. We talked about getting one for the library system, not for the public, just for us to kind of give that like layer. We're one to mount it to the wall, put a conveyor belt on it, so that what we can do is we can program it with up to 3 different choices of prints, like a little, you know, figure of some sort, a little flower and something else. And then what it would do is you basically come up, get a tablet, and you'd be like, oh, what do I want to print today? And you just choose the one you want. It'll print a quick little 15-minute print, drop down like a gumball machine, and you got your print, you know, and it's a gimmick, you know, but that's the difference, is that it's something that the public trying to use that machine to do all that stuff. That's a lot of coding. That's a lot of stuff that a lot of us in here probably can handle it, but outside of this, they ain't gonna know what's going on with that thing. It's tough, you know, because it's that Android side of things where you have to know what you're doing to make it do all the cool things. So that's one of those things when it comes to budget, you gotta kind of have to live in that halfway point where it's like, you don't want to go too low, because then you're going to need to know how to use this technology. You don't want to go too high, because then now you've burned your budget for one piece of equipment, and now you can't get anything else. So it's kind of that balance of things, you know, kind of like we talked about before, of like, you know, new equipment versus old equipment. It's kind of that balance, like you want to have both, but how much do you want to have, that kind of stuff.
Cool. Yeah, and on that point, like if you don't have a huge budget, what are some lower budget things you could do to start a makerspace that aren't super complex like that?
So right off the bat, the one that I think is by far the easiest and cleanest is going to be the Cricut. It's popular. It has a lot of, you know, easy to use functionality. It has a lot of knockoff pieces that you can get for super cheap. So if you need to replace mats, if you need to replace tools, if you need to get add-ons, like it has all that capability, and that's by far one of the most popular. So if you haven't checked out a Cricut, and you're like, what's a Cricut? I have one, I can tell you about it. But it's definitely one of those things that I think that's kind of like that halfway between the new and the old, but it's just a strong beast for libraries.
I have to say, I agree with Vinyl Cutter, but I love the Silhouette Cameo. I like the fact that it always makes me feel like there's a little bit more. It's a little bit easier to do like sticker sheets and things like that, because the Cricut requires sort of a print and play kind of thing where you have to have a printer connected. Or like saved to PDF kind of thing. Whereas anywhere, anytime you want to with the Silhouette software, you can just do that like at home, do it all, set it up, and then take your work to the machine. But I do believe that a vinyl cutter is a really great way to start because it's not as intimidating and it costs less than $200. I fought with that. I was trying to decide which would be the better one to start with, because it was either that or like an X tool version of a Glowforge, because I mean that will stop, that will be safe, and that's less than $1,000.
Yeah.
But I was like, which one will be less intimidating for both staff and the patrons that are coming in, right? And no matter what, that vinyl cutter is going to get used. I don't know if everyone here knows, but like back in the day, we used to cut for hours, right? Anything out that you're doing for programming, but now what used to take days takes hours on a vinyl cutter. Just turn that PDF file into a cutout for all your masks, right?
Yeah, goes real fast. I also wanted to touch base on one other one, which you kind of mentioned, was that laser cutters. With ours, we always talk about it like, oh, what's so special about your laser cutter versus others and stuff like that. And we're like, oh, it's the Pro, you know, this one's 65 watt, it's so special, you know, and they're like, well, what does that mean? You know, or 60 watt, and they're like, well, what does that mean? And you're like, well, 65 is kind of the cutoff between your residential going up into more of an industrial grade kind of thing. The difference really is what you're cutting versus engraving. When you get to a lower wattage, like the 40 watt range or even lower, those are your like little handheld laser cutters, you know, those ones are only going to be doing engraving. They're not going to be cutting anything because they're not a strong enough wattage to be able to actually cut through different materials. They might be able to do cardboard, some soft wood, but that'd be about the most of it. So yeah, they're capable, but they're very limited on what they can do because they're low wattage. You know, the benefit of this is that you're getting up into that 60 range, which means that you're actually be able to get to more, you know, solid materials, solid woods, getting into like some softer metals and stuff like that. It's when you start getting into like, oh, I want to do some hard metals and stuff like that. That's when you start crossing over into industrial grade and getting higher than 65 watt lasers. So that's depending on like what kind of materials and what capabilities do you want to go with. That's where you're going with. The same thing with these handhelds, much like we were saying, is that a lot of them tend to actually be literally handheld, where you're either holding it and you're putting like a cage over, and that's your only protection, is you're holding it, you know. Otherwise, there's ones that you just set down like a tower and it's just like, good luck. And then there's even weird attachments that you can do for 3D printers where you can actually like replace the head with a laser cutter and then you can put it inside there. But don't do that. It's really, there's so many wrong things about that. But those are like things that people see that as a shortcut, but it's not always the best idea because you don't realize how much you're limiting yourself when you do those kind of things.
Awesome. I think this is my last question I have before I'll open it up to questions you all might have. What are suggestions to help sell a makerspace to stakeholders, whether it's to start one, grow one, continue one? What do you think are the best sort of messages that you've seen that resonate with stakeholders?
My big thing is that when we first looked at Makerspaces, I was hands off and they went a different route than what I thought we would ever do. It didn't work. It was not as successful as I think they wanted it to be. This venture has been a lot more successful. I think it's one of those things that we were very fortunate on our side to have that almost competitor of a price point where the public wanted something that they had access to, and we were able to provide that access. So for us, that was our huge selling point, was that we can provide something to the public that they're not willing to provide or anything like that, that's directly to our community right here. So when we talked about what it means to the public and, you know, if we had to do it all again, talking about, you know, what these things can do just for the staff level, like the Cricut alone, just that has done for us, has expanded all of our programming here. So having that as a basic thing, showing like examples of, you know, case use and stuff like that. It's kind of like when we used to do Steam Club here. We used to do it where we would create a whole slew of a year's worth of events that we wanted to do. And we would show it. We'd be like, these are all the things that we want to do. And they'd be like, oh, it's so magical. Yes, signed off, go ahead and do that thing. That was the point though, is that you were able to show the volume. This is how much you can do with this program. So that's the same thing with this, is that you can show like, oh, we can do a podcast in the studio. Oh, we can do our interviews in here. Oh, we can bring the owl, we can do this. Oh, we can go out to events. It was so easy to sell all these things that I keep adding pieces in there. Because every time I say, oh, it'd be great if we had a sound booth, you know, because then we can take it out here and do this thing. They're sold, go ahead. So that's the benefit of that, is that it almost sells itself when you have that volume of what you can do with it.
I totally agree with you. Once you have it, I mean, just showing it and showing what you can do with it, people are sold the moment. They're like, wow. Because I love giving tours of Makerspace. I mean, there's nothing more that it's not the passion in your voice. It's what kind of access and what can be done. And they see themselves or see a friend or know a friend. When you're trying to convince stakeholders, I always think it's statistics and stories, right? How have other makerspaces done and how did they get that started? But also the idea of the difference that has made in the community and being able to have those elevator conversations about like what little things of, you know, someone who started out, you know, seeing the 3D printer, you know, back in the day at the library, falling in love with it. And now that they're an engineer who's now 3D printing, you know, heart valves, right? Those are the kind of difference making that we do, right? And so those kind of stories are also really awesome. That's a way to.
And that concludes the discussion portion. We planned that, man. So does anybody here have a question for Jeff or David?
Question. What would you suggest if you already have equipment? So from Stoffer Public Librarian, we have some equipment. We don't have a designated Makerspace librarian. Do you feel like that's a necessary first step to have somebody who's going to take ownership of it, spearhead the project? Or do you feel like it can be approached from a more collaborative, like all staff get trained at the same time and still be effective?
What kind of equipment do you have?
We have a couple of 3D printers. We have two credits. Sewing machine, we even making equipment, but we don't know. I mean, we don't have the familiar.
So this is the problem that we had with kind of our first round of the Makerspace, is that, like I said, we had bought 3D printers, but we used them only internally. We didn't use them externally. And at that time, I was kind of starting to take lead and be like, well, I'm the most capable, able to do these kind of things. So I was, you know, helping people out, showing them how to use this kind of stuff. But whenever I left the room, they put it kind of in the middle of the table. And then the box kind of got put here next to it. And I would go over to these branches and I would see our mini 3D printer sitting in the corner. And you're just like, okay, cool. Can I have that back then? I'll start a print farm, you know. It's one of those things that it depends on the capability of staff. So like you said, if you're just like unsure about what you're doing with it, it's either, this is no jab at you, I promise. It's like you step up and you like learn how to do it. You take that dedication for it. But in reality, having somebody that's their role to do the training and do all that stuff, I think that's been more of our key thing here, is that whenever we've done any big rollouts, ebooks back in the day, we had somebody come in and teach how to use tablets to our own staff because nobody knew how to use tablets. You know, it's the same concept with any technology, frankly. If you're going to have that, have somebody dedicated, even if it's temporary, you have somebody come out and train you and do all that stuff. So that way you feel comfortable to do that. We do it with our staff for the safety of the fire. You know, we're not going to have them go in there until they have done the fire safety and they've done the LSO training. Once they've done that, then they can do that. You know, I want them to feel confident in that. I don't want them to be like, yeah, they have the knowledge of doing it, but as soon as the fire breaks out, I don't want them to run out of the room and run out the building. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, the big thing is it depends on your team. I mean, if you have a team who wants to like, you don't just make a mini makerspace, then that team is going to make it happen. But if there's only one of you who wants it, And that one person gets to be that flagship to begin the awesome adventure of making that accessible. I mean, did you guys had a teen makerspace, right?
We did, yeah.
Yeah.
I've only been there for 5 months, so we're trying to kind of revamp. Get it going again.
Awesome, that's so awesome.
I will say too that any technology that you have, if you don't use it, you lose it. We have iPads and we have our nice Apple Pencils. And they were stagnant over the summer because we didn't do any programs that involved the pencils. And we lost half our pencils. That was, we had 14, so that's $700. Just. Because once these lose charge, they're gone, they're done. They don't, you have to keep them charged and everything like that. And so they just sat and that was it. It was a simple mistake that cost a pretty penny.
I did not know that. I gotta make sure my Apple Pencil watches.
I've
never,
If they're not constantly charged, they're.
If they go to zero charge, they're done. So
And does
The
that
Oculus
warn you
Quest.
beforehand? Say, hey, what?
no, there's nothing that
Yeah,
that gives you a warning. The Oculus Quest 2 also do the same thing. Those have the same kind of battery, and so if they go to zero, most batteries, frankly, you should never actually let them go all the way to zero. It's actually really bad for battery. Yeah, and it's like same thing, if you always leave them plugged in, it's also bad for you. Then if you didn't, you don't, you know, but yeah, it's one of those things that even with my Oculus, I had it sitting in the corner. And we just hadn't done it for a while, and then I went to go charge it, and it was giving me like some warning flashes, and I'm like, awesome. I was able to resolve that one, but yeah, if you don't use equipment, you do lose it, so keep that in mind. Make sure that worst case, my old routine was create a cycle of use. So do a dedicated program that at least uses it, that way you know that you touched it at some point.
I've heard people too use Christmas light timers for charging. If it's gonna be in storage.
Yeah.
So it charges part of the day and then
Yeah.
lets it just flat drain a little and then charge.
For it.
That's why we have these boxes, the tech hubs, they have it where you plug them in, but what they'll do is they'll do residual charging. So that way it's kind of like the steady, it's not gonna be like where it's a constant. And it'll let it drain itself down and then come up and go up.
Now I need to look at my Apple One pencil.
It's been 7 months.
It literally was like, we were like trying to figure out, we're like, what's going on? Like, what is, and they won't charge. Some will stay at 0%, some will say like, I'm charging. And I'm at 100%, and you plug it's all 3%. Okay,
That's horrible.
yeah, it's FYI.
It's a problem with any non-regulated lithium battery will.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, once it goes down, it starts to try to crystallize and the lithium goes bad on you and it's no good.
Yeah, so a lot of your equipment, just make sure you're using it.
Our makerspace is tiny. We have no, I'm with Batch Junction, we've got like no space. We've got equipment. We've got that, we've got some sewing machines and stuff that just never come out, like they only come out for programs. Is there like a good way to, like, I don't know, even try and like cycle something out or in, or can I get some stuff? Like where I'm like, okay, can I just have this out where people know we have them to try and get them used? I mean, that's, I've been trying to drive use because after COVID, we had no one coming in at all. And then I've only been doing it for like 6 months now that I've been trying to get people in. And I'm like trying to run demos all the time and just trying to drive usage, but.
So it's kind of a couple different things. One, there's like, when it comes to makerspaces, I've seen 2 different types primarily. An open makerspace or a closed makerspace. We operate with a closed makerspace. So ours is the Makery lab, which is the corner room right behind the door. And it's gonna be a former study room. So it's tiny. It's usually just one person and us for fire safety, and like, that's it. I will allow like, a father with you know, 2 kids or whatever,
Right.
to a couple or whatever, I'll allow that, but it's like, it's a small room. So we have the equipment in there, but it's only like one-time use at a time. That's a closed makerspace. An open makerspace would be more like this room. If you had all the equipment in here and you basically, you could come in and use one equipment while somebody's over here using another equipment and stuff like that. Again, ventilation, you know, you gotta make sure you have all the proper protocols and all that stuff. So we can't really make use of that in here because, yeah, we have the fans to circulate air, but it's not venting the air out.
Right.
So it's not ideal to have everything going on in here. I would love that. If I could make this into an open makerspace, that'd be so much better. Cost is ridiculous, but that would make it so much easier to manage the equipment. Otherwise, like, it's about getting awareness to it. So like I kind of talked about programming, getting people to see it and stuff like that. You know, think about where you're doing that program, how you're doing that program. For example, this room that we're in right now, this actually used to be the youth staff room. That used to be a solid wall, and this used to be all cubicles and everything. And then in the back behind the elevator, there's a hallway that goes around the corner. That used to be where our makerspace room used to be. It was around the corner, down a hall. There was one little arrow that everybody missed.
Get a candle.
I mean, I had, my program back in the day was like 8 people. Because they happened to stumble down a hallway. It was tough. Since I've been over here, you get that walk by, the drive by attention.
And that's where we have our 3D, but it's why we make sure that like our 3D printer sits in the window. Like, and I try to keep things running on it because that's, I've noticed that if I'm running prints, people will stop and look at the printer.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, that's just been our kind of our thing is trying to figure out. Like, like sort of the thought I had was trying to get like in our jobs room, like maybe get all the software, the 3D software and everything on that and have that be open use. And then kind of close off our makerspace a little bit, like it's still got the glass window, but I mean, we've got so little space in there.
Yeah.
Like, is that something that sounds reasonable?
So is it a computer lab? Do you have like actual like computer access?
Yeah, we have a full, we have like a 30 seat, it's a jobs training room
Okay.
that like, so if we could get like, what I was thinking was like, if we could get like the 3D printing software, the, you know, like Blender or whatever, and get, even the Cricut or the Silhouette software on those and let people do their work there.
Yeah.
And then, okay, once you've got a project ready to go, you can go over to the makerspace and actually use the machinery.
So what I found that would be really helpful, especially with 3D printing,
Mhm.
was that I would use Tinkercad because it's web-based.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do
that
the
as well.
installation, worry about firewalls, all that good stuff. The second part is that with that has great tutorial training built into it. But what I did is I created like a basic train whistle. It's just 2 cylinders, couple notches, all that good stuff. It's very simple. But what I did is I pre-printed all the train whistles. And the way I did is I walked them through. So we all designed a train whistle together live on the computer.
Mhm.
So that way they got the idea of what they were doing. And like, they were like, and here's the thing that you made. We 3D printed it. And it was that illusion that they 3D printed that thing, you know.
Our super fast print.
Right? But it was, you know, they would hold it up, they'd be like, no. You know, but it was enough that they got the concept. And I think that was like my biggest hook that I did. You know, we did some, you know, holiday ornaments that we did where we had little notches in the front so that you could plug in like whatever charm you wanted. And stuff like that. All these different programs, it was all the same concept. It was that illusion that they were 3D printing, but they were doing more of the 3D modeling side. And that was enough to get them hooked on like, oh, I can do this with the 3D printer. You know, showing realistic examples of how it can be used in the real world. You know, I fixed the dishwasher with it once.
Yeah, because
Gumball machine.
yeah, 90% of what we have is people coming in and us telling them, well, you can grab a file off of Thingiverse and run it on our machine.
Yep.
And that's like 90% of what happens is people just go on a Thingiverse, grab something and print it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're not really learning how to use the 3D printer.
Yeah, so the way that I see them is that a 3D printer is not used the way that it should be. A 3D printer to the public is gonna be a trinket machine.
Yeah.
The Glowforge, to me, from what I've seen, as far as people using it, is it's practical. You know, I saw somebody actually come in, they make stickers themselves on their own Cricut machine. And then they wanted a way to demo it, so they actually cut out wood and acrylic to actually make a stand for it, kind of like a spice rack for their stickers, but it was custom designed for the shapes of their stickers. That's like, it was practical use of it, you know, and stuff like that. I see a lot of that with the Glowforge. Same thing with the Cricut machine itself. I see that a lot of like more business orientated side of things, you know, so that's where I see those kind of equipment kind of thing. So the 3D printer, like, I love the 3D printer. I think it's
Yeah.
great. But as far as how I've seen it used, very rarely do I see it on the engineer side of things.
Yeah.
I have one gentleman that he's trying to create his own prototype for a new invention. I have another gentleman that his child's doll, like mechanical doll, broke, and he 3D printed the mechanism, like he recreated the mechanism by calibrating crap out of the sucker. And he redesigned it and made it stronger, and then he replaced it so that it worked. But there's like very rare is at that level of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just a matter of how you sell it. It's a trinket machine.
So you said this room over here is small and that's where like they do this stuff. So do you just roll out the machines over there?
Yeah, so what we do is we have with this one underneath, we have the HEPA filter. So that way we can actually have it in this room. Obviously, it's not gonna do like 100%, you know, but that's why we have the airflow in here. It's just that kind of helps mitigate it a little bit. But yeah, when we do our big programs, we'll do it in here. I'll usually have the Glowforge in the middle here, so that everybody can kind of see it. And then on the tables, kind of how we have stuff scattered around. We'll do it where like, this is all the maintenance stuff that you need to know about. This is all of the materials stuff that you need to know about. Here's some demo of like things that we've done. And here's materials you want to do something. You know, that kind of stuff. And that's what we do kind of for everything. Same thing with the 3D printer. We'll roll it out, put it in the middle. And then that one, instead of, we don't have the HEPA filter from the top of it yet, but we have a little HEPA filter on the side, so it kind of helps. But we'll put that same thing out on the table, and then we'll cleaning supplies, maintenance supply, you know, we'll put all the stuff out. So that way they get an idea of everything that goes into that kind of stuff.
And the customers bring in their own wood, acrylic, or what about for the Cricut or
So for
vinyl?
the Cricut and the Glowforge, they bring in their own materials. But for the 3D printer at this time, we're providing all filament because we don't want anything.
Right.
So far.
Yeah,
No ABS, you know.
I may have at one point in time tried to do some flex silicone stuff, and I may have clogged my machine at one point in time. I was very inexperienced, and I'm trying something new. I'm much better at it now, I promise.
I have a question. So I'm at the Burton Bar Central Library Makerspace. Name is Jamie Pearson. We've been limiting our Makerspace programs only for kids and teens. So there's some pushback on whether or not we should allow adults to use. And I wonder, like, how have things gone with like having teens and adults and programs? So, or yeah, because I know it's like 12 and up.
Yeah, so ours, we base a lot of our equipment all based on this guy right here, which has a basis of 16 and up. So our stuff is really 16 and up. We do try to like bend it down to 14, but that's about the max of it with other equipment. But yeah, we haven't had any issues with it because again, they're not doing it at the same time for the most part. When we do our programs, there is a mix. And I have had it before when I done the 3D modeling basics. When I do that kind of stuff, teaching Tinkercad and stuff like that, that's where the hardest part comes in, because you have a room of like, say, 20 people that are beginner all the way up to expert. And you're trying to like find a balance between that, and it's not that simple because you listen as basics, but they're not in the basics. And then you get people that are too young to understand, and you're like, I don't want to like kick you out because that's not fair. So I try to help everybody, but it is a struggle with that kind of thing. I've never stopped it, I just did push through.
Oh.
But yeah, I've never had any problems or anything like that with general programming. We do try to limit teen and adult
Mhm.
interactivity, but there are certain things like this that we do allow that.
And I do individual teen programming and adult programming.
Okay.
So basically to use the machines anytime, you just have to be 12 and older. And if you're between 12 and 18, when your waiver is signed, if you will, it has a parent or guardian signature. But for the most part, I mean, we've never really had any problems with, 12 to 18-year-olds having issues with the machines for the most part. I'm sure that there's one or two individual ones, but honestly, the 4 years I've been working there, not a whole lot of anything. Honestly, some people give me a hard time because we're not letting, some of the 10-year-olds do it. You're just like, if you're old enough to be in the teen room, you're old enough to use the equipment, because we're right next door, ThinkSpot's right next door to the teen zone. So, but yeah, I do them separately because I found that the adults generally, I mean, it's so interesting. Teens, they instantly adapt. When I do something where we're doing CAD design and they're designing their own bookmark, or something, I have to say very little. They instantly get Tinkercad and they're just rocking it. And the worst thing that happens is they make it so it's not much of a bookmark anymore. Or maybe they didn't quite understand how to make the cookie cutter that I've already pre-printed. Because by no means are we going to pull off printing a gazillion different stuff. But then you have the adults, and the adults are either incredibly critical or more like the kids, where they're not getting instant gratification. So it's sort of like I like to have them separate. The only time that I have teens and adults in the same program is for sewing, because it's sometimes that bonding time between moms and their daughters, and it could be any gender, but you guys know what I mean, right? And so that's the only one I generally do that for, because I think adults like to feel like this is for them and teens like to feel like this is for them. But yeah.
Any other questions?
Anything from the,
No, I asked about 5 minutes ago, nobody's. went to.
all right, well, thank you everybody for coming. We'll be hanging out for just a little bit longer. We have our gadget show and tell, some cool stuff here from the Makery. We brought the owl over here, which has been dutifully following around whoever's talking as we go through this meeting. And I believe you brought this one here. What is this, the cruiser?
Yeah, so this is the book scanner. So our Makerspace, we're kind of like you guys where we don't have a dedicated team, and we only have one meeting room that everything has to happen in. So one of the things we've been doing is trying to get really creative with it. So a book scanner, for example, it not only scans documents, but you can scan like individual submissions, or like you do like a clipbook. You can take their individual frames and turn it into an animation that you can test it on. Or like speaking of the TriCat, I took a tangram set, scanned it using the book scanner, and printed off digital text that I could distribute that way. It's also like live demonstration, that kind of thing, and in the future, like trying to mix like photo editing into it, so like if they scan in like multimedia elements like photos and things like that, so that they can use real world tools such as like Photoshop or like that sort of thing. So that model I've checked is going for like $600, but of course there is cheaper, and spelled CZR is always putting their newest model on Kickstarters, like months before it goes to market, for at least a third or less markup. of the price, and it ends up being so. I definitely recommend it even for, non-makerspace users, staff users. Even story times if, youth literacy has been a theme there as well, so, yeah.
Cool, thanks for sharing. Yeah, we'll be hanging out, there's some donuts and coffee left, so thank you everybody for coming, thank you everybody on the Zoom meeting. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.